LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, former Prime Minister Tony Blair has told LBC the Middle East is further from peace now than when he was in office. He refused to be drawn on the government's decision to suspend some UK arms sales to Israel.
The thing that I'm focused on and active on is how we bring the conflict to an end and revive the prospects for, I think, the only solution that really brings a final end to the conflict, which is self-determination for the Palestinians and security for Israel.
And you can hear the full interview with James O'Brien on LBC tomorrow morning from 10 a.m. A former chief inspector of prisons has told LBC the government's had no choice but to let thousands of prisoners out because of overcrowding. Next week, some inmates serving 5 years or less will be released. But there's a warning the cells could be filled up very quickly because of reoffending and recent riots in England. Former Chief Inspector Nick Hardwick told LBC reoffending rates need addressing.
About a third of people who are released from prison reoffend within 1 year. So a lot of these people, and they're mainly men, would have reoffended anyhow. The real problem is because prisons are so full, they're not doing the work necessary to try and reduce that reoffending risk.
The Royal Navy says it's investigating after a member of personnel died when a helicopter was forced to ditch into the English Channel last night. It crashed following an exercise with aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth. An investigation's opened into Ticketmaster following the sale of Oasis tickets. The competition watchdog's encouraging fans to submit screenshots they may have taken during their attempts to see the band. LBC's Fraser Knight has more.
It will investigate whether Ticketmaster engaged in unfair commercial practices, if they properly informed and explained that those tickets could be subject to so-called dynamic pricing. And also, the CMA says it will be looking at whether people were put under pressure to buy tickets.
It's been a successful night for the swimmers at the Paralympics, with Great Britain adding 2 golds. Rebecca Redfern's SB13 100 metres breaststroke victory was followed up with a first-place finish for Alice Tai in the S8 50 metres freestyle. In the city, the FTSE 100s closed down 27 points at 82.41. The pound buys $1.31 and €1.18. LBC weather, mainly dry and breezy tonight, but heavy rain for southwest England and southern Wales later. A low of 11 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Simon Marks.
I am in for Ian Dale once again tonight, and I'm really sorry he is not here for this hour, because it is a joy to welcome to the studio Sir Anthony Seldon, the educator and historian whose new book, Truss at 10, How Not to Be a Prime Minister, is, as its title suggests, an object lesson in all the things you should definitely never do if you're thinking of having a crack at the nation's top job. Sir Anthony writes, she lacked the most important quality a Prime Minister needs: judgment. And in this hour, we're going to talk about the Liz Truss administration, short as it was, about the lessons Sir Anthony argues the Conservatives and other politicians can learn from it, and also about the future of the Conservatives as their leadership contest gets underway and as Reform UK continues to circle in the waters. So if you've got questions about Liz Truss and her time in office, we'd be happy to hear them. Or if you want to talk about the future of the Conservative Party, you can ask Sir Anthony for his thoughts on its direction. Can it survive in the form that we have all known it, back to the era of Churchill, Macmillan and, of course, Margaret Thatcher? Or is a Donnybrook coming that could see it eclipsed by other political forces, the Lib Dems, Reform UK? What positions should the Conservative Party take that will future-proof it at a time of existential challenge? You can call us now at 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp your questions to that number as well. You can text us at 84850, or you can tell Alexa to send a message to LBC. And Sir Anthony Seldon is with us for the full hour, not just on the radio, but you can also watch us in glorious high definition, because this hour is on Global Player as well. Sir Anthony, welcome to the studio. Thank you so much for coming in tonight. This is a fascinating book. I'd like to read a section from the opening. You say, she came, she saw, she crashed. In the 3 centuries of the history of the British Prime Minister, there has never been a premiership like that of Liz Truss. She had promise, the most experienced incomer in 32 years, with high intelligence, a clear plan, and the right focus diagnosed: growth. Britain has had short-serving prime ministers before, but nowhere else in our long history, you write, has a prime minister arrived in power, so spectacularly mishandled an ambitious agenda, detonated an economic crisis, reversed their policies and fallen from power in less than 50 days. It paved the way for the worst Tory election result in history in July 2024. We shall not see her like again. Why are you sure that we won't see her like again?
Well, I mean, ultimately, I'm not. I mean, we could, but I think it's very unlikely. It hasn't happened for 300 years. I mean, that will take us 300 years into the future. I mean, it was spectacular. It was like a firework display. It was unimaginable. It was unbelievable. But it happened, and many people listening and watching the programme tonight, their businesses, their own personal finances, mortgages will have suffered and still be suffering because of what she did. And she didn't listen. I mean, look, she had the right policy. It's like a new manager of English football coming on and saying, look, their ambition is to win the Euro 28 and the next World Cup. I mean, that's the right ambition. She had the right ambition. It's just she hadn't a clue how to bring it about.
You met her, I think it was 9 months after she left the premiership, and you unexpectedly had an encounter with her. Tell us about that.
Yes, my first time I met her. So there I was at a party thinking, my goodness, everyone here is so interesting and no one's going to want to talk to me. And suddenly, out of the blue, there was this face in front of mine and it turned out to be Liz Truss. And she said, I hear you're writing a book about me. I didn't know what to say. I said, well, I mean, I said, I may be. And she said, I am writing my own book, don't you know? And I said, well, good on you. And before I could think through what I was going to say about it, she's suddenly gone into the crowd. And there I was, again, left talking to nobody.
Now, let's go to Tuesday, September the 6th, 2022. She's become Conservative Party leader. And you say that the response to her was, you quote a Conservative MP, recollecting the atmosphere among fellow MPs the first time that Liz Truss addressed them as Prime Minister. The response to her was tepid. We all noticed it didn't feel right. First of all, that leadership contest had been complicated. Secondly, she becomes leader, becomes Prime Minister, and from the outset, there were people within the Conservative Party parliamentary grouping that were saying there's something wrong here.
Yeah, so we need to be a bit careful here because her ultra supporters will say, she fell because Rishi Sunak supporters and other elements never accepted her and they were determined to do her down. I mean, there's a kind of element of truth in that, but she didn't win the popular vote. So just like we're now seeing, you got the candidates for the Tory party leadership, and Priti Patel has been knocked out, and it gets down to they're just 2. And she made it just through to the final 2. Penny Mordaunt had been in the lead with Rishi Sunak all the way through, but she just pipped in to the final 2. But she came second against him. And, she never, a more intelligent or astute operator would have recognised that she wasn't the popular choice amongst her own clan of Tory MPs and thought, I'm going to go out and I'm going to build bridges, I'm going to win people round, I'm going to have them into Downing Street, have them to Chequers, have them into my room in the Houses of Parliament, I'm going to listen to them, make them feel valued, but not a bit of it. She sailed in as if she'd come in with a stonking Starmer-like majority. She never won her own general election, remember that. It was Boris Johnson's election victory from December 2019, and Boris Johnson had been key in bringing her to power. But, she didn't accept the fact that she was never the popular choice of Tory MPs. She was there really and she won because she wasn't Rishi Sunak.
But how do you explain her lack of desire to go and press the flesh and buy everybody a drink and have a cup of tea with them? I mean, was she capable of reading the room, or was it a matter of just she's not comfortable enough in those settings?
I think both of that. She didn't read the room. She didn't have those political antennae that we were hearing from Tony Blair earlier. I mean, Tony Blair, had political antennae whizzing 100 feet a mile above his head. She had none of that. She just didn't get it. She didn't understand. She also wasn't good at pressing the flesh, Some prime ministers, Keir Starmer's not particularly good at it either. I don't think that necessarily matters, but you need to compensate in other ways. You need to win people over. The power of the prime minister, like the power of the American president, is the power to persuade. And she never persuaded enough people of her cause to go for that mini budget. If she'd done that, she'd listened to them, it could have been very different. She could still be in power.
She could still be in power if she'd read the room and played the room better.
There needn't to be a general election till January 2025. She could still be the prime minister.
Now, you said at the beginning she had the right policy. I mean, by which you meant the right ambition, which was to spur growth.
Yeah. And to try and spread it and to spread enterprise throughout the country. I mean, one thing that is so distressing is the inequality, the regional inequality in Britain, economically and socially, and in terms of healthcare outcomes. And she wanted to address all of that, and that was surely the right thing to do. But she's made that cause harder because she went about it in such a cat-handed, bad way.
I want to ask you more about that in a second, but we've got a question here that's been sent in on text by Nikki in Kent, who says, Sir Anthony, does the Tory party get the disastrous leaders it deserves, like Truss, because the choice in the end is made by a few Tory members who are of the same demographic, social class, ethnicity and mindset?
So, ethnicity is obviously interesting because the Conservative Party is so diverse at its top. But I think you're right, Nikki, that as it's turned out to be, a disastrous change came in, which was introduced 15 years ago, which has allowed the party members to have the final say of the final two, as is going to happen this time round. And the party members are so unrepresentative, overwhelmingly over 60, and from a very limited social and every other kind of background. And that's not the representative of Conservative voters, or indeed the kinds of voters the Conservative Party is going to need to win over if it's ever going to defeat Keir Starmer.
And so in terms of the current leadership campaign, and we're going to talk about it more in detail later, but what does that composition of the party membership suggest to you about where this leadership battle is heading?
Well, the party leadership, or the party in the country, this very unrepresentative group of Tory members who have the ultimate say, will almost always go for the more right-wing candidate. And that's not necessarily what the Tory voters... Look, it's so obvious if you look at history. The Tory party dominated the 20th century. It was called the Conservative Century, was the title of an earlier book I wrote in the 1990s. It's dominated the last 2 centuries because it hasn't been a right-wing party. It's been in the centre ground. The other parties, usually Labour, have been off to the left. And most voters, surprise, surprise, are in the centre ground. And they believe in the nation, they believe in a good foreign policy, good defence policy, but they also believe in the welfare state, and they believe in law and order. And that's the Tories, that is where it's won from. That's how it's dominated so much of British history. And, it's hardly rocket science, is it?
So of the 5 currently in the contest, who does that most favour?
Well, maybe maybe James Cleverly, maybe Tom Tugendhat. Somebody who is able to persuade many people who voted Labour that the Tory party best represents their interests. The Tory party as the one nation party, as the great 19th century Tory Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli talked about, it's the one nation party. And so I think those two perhaps.
OK, we are talking this hour to Sir Anthony Seldon, whose new book, Truss at 10, How Not to Be a Prime Minister, published by Atlantic Books, is a fascinating read about Liz Truss's 49 days in number 10 Downing Street. But we are, as you can hear, also broadening this out to talk about the choices that the Conservatives now face after their election drubbing at the hands of Sir Keir Starmer and Labour. You can ask questions of Sir Anthony. You can call in at 0345 6060 973. You can text us at 84850, or you can tell Alexa to send a message to LBC, where the time is now 16 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. This is LBC with Simon Marks.
And in this hour, we're talking to Sir Anthony Seldon, whose new book, Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister, is currently the number one best-selling hardback non-fiction book in the UK. So congratulations on that. Sir Anthony, we were talking about Liz Truss's economic policies and approach towards attaining growth. Can you explain what she envisioned when she talked about Singapore on Thames?
Well, it's all kind of a post-Brexit vision of a country that would be freer from restrictions from the hated and dreaded EU, that was able to make its own way in the world and to have business unstrapped by high taxes and by pointless regulations, and to liberate it in the way that Singapore has had a remarkable success story over the last 60, 70 years. And that was the kind of extraordinary utopian vision that she and a lot of other Brexiteers had for Britain. Because it wasn't just Brexiteers that wanted this. Many people who preferred to remain in the EU also wanted to see growth. I mean, she had the right policy, I think, because Britain hasn't grown since the global financial crisis of 2007, 8, 9. We've been stuck in stagnation without growth, and parts of the country really howling with pain. I mean, she wanted to come in and give a massive dose of adrenaline to the British economy, freeing up the creative parts of the financial sectors and manufacturing and industry and all the productive sectors of the economy to really do growth.
John in Hartlepool asks, did Liz Truss understand what she was implementing, or was she just repeating slogans from think tanks like the Institute on Economic Affairs that they had given her? It seemed to me, writes John, that she often struggled to answer questions about her policies. You do make the point in the book that her core team was never ideologically at one. And with regard to the IEA, we should also disclose that you have a family tie to the IEA through your father, who I believe was one of its co-founders.
Yeah, that's correct. And the IEA was a great force behind Margaret Thatcher. And it was in reaction to the heavy taxes and high government spending that was introduced in Britain after the Second World War. And the IEA's vision was for much more of a free market economy, much more low tax and low spending, much more space for individual freedom and companies to go about their business and to unleash that entrepreneurial desire of companies to grow and grow and grow. And I think that's a great question. I don't think she understood how to do it. I think she believed her own rhetoric. Like many people who make profound mistakes in life, they are so convinced of their own rightness that they don't listen to other people. And when people raised objections saying, Prime Minister, this is the right policy, but you're trying to do it in the wrong way. You're trying to do it too quickly. You're trying to go too fast. You need to balance it out. She wouldn't listen, and she'd think that people who were raising objections to her were all part of a kind of conspiracy to do down growth.
Yes, I want to come back to the conspiracy issue in a second, but let's go to the phones because our first caller to Sir Anthony Seldon is David in Northwood. Good evening, David. What would you like to ask Sir Anthony?
Hi, Simon. It's more of a statement than it is a question. I'm 36. I'm Indian. I'm brown. I'm a Conservative Party member. I think it's very outdated that people think that all members are white, middle-aged, who have these massive, as you refer to, a Downton Abbey house.
Well, just to be clear, David, that reference to a Downton Abbey house was actually in the previous hour on a completely different topic.
But it was referred to as a Conservative Party member outlook, wasn't it?
Not in the context in which it was being used. We were talking about the water company executives in that hour, but nonetheless,
all right, okay.
Continue.
Forgive me. But I think it's just a very outdated opinion, isn't it? I'm not one of those people. I've worked damn hard for my money. I want to have my opinion listened to. I want to have an input into the person that should be running this country. So, I just think it's such an outdated thing to say, that all these people are white and middle-aged.
Is the Conservative Party outdated in the way that it thinks of its own membership?
Well, I wonder about that, David, and thank you for the question. The membership, the data shows, is unrepresentative of the country at large. And are you yourself a Conservative Party member?
David is a Conservative Party member, yes. Okay. He's gone off the line, but he is indeed a Conservative Party member.
So I think that the Conservative Party, I'm not a member, and I'm not a Conservative, but the Conservative Party clearly has a very good representation in its top candidates, as indeed it did in the top posts from Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary, Chancellor of the Exchequer, way ahead indeed of Labour. And as I was saying, David, the Conservative Party will do well when it is in the centre ground and in touch with the great the greatest numbers of people in this country and in touch with their instincts. That's what the Conservative Party is. And I think it's lost its way because it's got too tribal, too partisan. It's been arguing with itself too much, and it's forgotten the golden rule of why the Conservative Party is successful, because it represents the great majority of this country.
I was struck by the fact that as things were really on the brink of falling apart for Liz Truss, she was already saying to aides and advisers that there was a Bank and Whitehall conspiracy against her, that this wasn't an argument that she advanced only after she left power. She was advancing it even as she was in power, as the chaos was playing out behind her.
So, an explanation for that is that she made her way up as a woman through the ranks, and she didn't have a public school, private school education, and she'd been patronised by many men, as she would see it. And she felt mistrustful. But I think it goes way beyond her own experience. I think part of her understanding of that ideology or belief of the free market was that you're either a true believer or you are nothing at all. There was no space for shades of grey or for nuance or for taking things a bit more gradually. I mean, look, she made a huge fuss of her great idols were the American president of the 1980s, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher. But Margaret Thatcher took 2 years to unroll her policies. She didn't come in and in the first week it wham bang dingo, it was initiating her policies. She really took things carefully and gradually. And had she actually studied Margaret Thatcher and the history of Margaret Thatcher more, she would not have made the mistakes that she did, but she didn't listen then. And
with regard to that reverence for Reagan, actually she attended the Republican convention in Milwaukee a few weeks ago and told a group of delegates from Pennsylvania that she had actually acquired a Liberty Bell shower head that she had first seen at Ronald Reagan's home out in California. There was a real reverence for Reagan, and yet you write, to an extent that was to irk Washington, she placed a close relationship with the United States at the heart of her overseas vision. Why did that irk Washington?
Because she didn't tune it to the fact that there was a Democrat, Joe Biden, there. And it's hard to think of any time in the last 70 years since the Suez Crisis in the 1950s that an American president has been so dismissive of a British Prime Minister as President Biden was in an ice cream parlour, being dismissive of the effectiveness of her policies. So she did great damage to that key relationship, as you yourself know, as a Washington correspondent, to huge damage to the relationship, although it's now been repaired. And now she is a big fan of Donald Trump. And I think another distressing thing with the conspiracy is, surely no one listening to the programme tonight, or those unimaginable people who are not listening. Why would anyone in the country not be listening to LBC tonight? Anyone, surely no one could say that it was a success, her premiership. Most people, when they make mistakes, most people admit an error, but she doesn't. And it's part of her conspiracy mindset that she thinks her failure was all down to other people. She was brought down by enemies within the Conservative Party, people who'd never liked her, and it was the City of London, it was the Civil Service, the Treasury, it was the Bank of England, it was everybody and anybody but herself and her judgment.
But is there any degree of truth to that claim that it was a huge conspiracy?
Oh, there's always an element of truth, and the Bank of England hasn't been perfect. The Treasury's advice and warnings at the critical hour that there was all the the terrible worries about the state of the financial markets. The advice on overseas finance could have been stronger, but partly because the person who knew most is called Tom Scholar, who's what's called the permanent secretary, the head of the Treasury, and she sacked him on almost day one because she didn't like him. And so she robbed herself of the best kind of advice in some cases. So, of course, the civil service, all these places are far from perfect, but fundamentally and overwhelmingly, she takes the blame because the Prime Minister is the buck stops, the pound stops with the Prime Minister, and they have to take responsibility. It was her judgment. She was the one person who loaded everything and pressed the button.
Much more to come with Sir Anthony Seldon. His new book is called Truss at 10, How Not to Be a Prime Minister. It is published by Atlantic Books. You can join our conversation at 0345 6060973. You can text us at 84850 and you can tell Alexa to send a message to LBC. But now with the time at 8:31, the news headlines come from Daryl Jackson.
Former Prime Minister Tony Blair has told LBC an end to the conflict in the Middle East feels further away now than when he was in number 10. He says most reasonable people know there needs to be a two-state solution. The Royal Navy says it's investigating after a member of personnel died when a helicopter was forced to ditch into the English Channel last night. It crashed following an exercise with aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth. And an investigation's opened into Ticketmaster following the sale of Oasis tickets. The competition watchdog's encouraging fans to submit screenshots they may have taken during their attempts to see the band. LBC weather mainly dry and breezy tonight, but heavy rain for the southwest of England and southern Wales later with a low of 11 degrees.
This is LBC. Simon Marks on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
Talking this hour with Sir Anthony Seldon about his new book on Liz Truss, Truss at 10, How Not to Be a Prime Minister. Sir Anthony, you go into great detail. I mean, you really lift the lid off the chaos that was taking place behind the scenes, and it's an alarming read. You claim in the book that at one point there was consideration being given to cutting NHS cancer care in order to pay for tax cuts. Now, I know Liz Truss and her people contest that, and I can read a statement from them in a moment. But first of all, explain how that concept your reporting suggests arose.
So, because of the mini-budget that she and Kwasi Kwarteng, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, introduced, it had a catastrophic effect on the financial markets. And there was a very seriously bad reaction to it. And it revealed that there was a black hole of £72 billion. Now, that is over twice the amount of cuts that George Osborne, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, introduced during his period of austerity. So it was massive, and the civil service, as it has to do on these occasions, came up with a list of cuts that could be enacted if £72 billion were to be found to get Britain back into a strong financial position again and avoid a terrible crash on the financial markets. And on that list was the suggestion that cancer treatment on the NHS would be one of the things that could be pared back. And her own staff were worried, desperately worried about her, because she was going around saying we need to have cuts. I don't believe that we can't make the cuts. Of course we can make the cuts. And they were worried about where exactly the cuts would fall. Now, as it happened, there wasn't time for her to consider, still less implement, obviously, cuts that drastic, because the policy was changed, and she sacked her Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng and introduced Jeremy Hunt, and he produced a whole set of policies that effectively reversed her entire premiership.
Now, a spokesperson for Liz Truss has said silly season appears to be in full swing. It is completely untrue that she ever considered it. And LBC spoke with two people who worked with Liz Truss in Number 10, and they said the Treasury presented her with advice on how to fill that black hole, which included cuts to the NHS that included cancer treatment, but it was part of a menu of worst-case scenario options. She'd never have done it. Do you think she would never have done it?
I don't think she would have done it, but she certainly considered it. Obviously, she considered it because it was presented to her, and there was no impact-free way of suddenly having to find £72 billion worth of savings. There was no way that you could do it that people wouldn't notice, that wouldn't be incredibly serious. Some of them were a lot more serious than paring back cancer treatment on the NHS. So it's completely true that she considered it.
More with Sir Anthony Seldon on Liz Truss in a moment. But Anthony has called from Westminster and he's got his eyes on the future. Anthony, what would you like to ask Sir Anthony?
Hello, Simon. Very nice to speak with you.
And with you.
And I'd like to ask Sir Anthony this question. Is there any chance of the Tories being elected in 2029? Simple question, really. And who is the preferred candidate, his preferred candidate?
Well, first of all, congratulations on having the best name, Anthony. Much better than any other ridiculous name like Simon, for example. But I think everything I've said so far, Anthony, would suggest that the best candidate will be the one who can really connect with Conservative voters in the country, including all of those who decided not to vote Conservative in the early summer in the general election, but also significantly appeal to those who voted Labour. And that has to be somebody who has the kind of personality and character that can connect, somebody who comes across as decent, honourable, on the side of the country, on the side of everybody. And I think if the party can find such a candidate, it will maximise the chances of the Conservatives winning in 2029. And only maximise it. But I think it's going to be, Anthony, mainly down, who will win will be mainly down to, does Keir Starmer do the business? If he does, I don't think the Conservatives got much of a look in.
And Anthony, answer your own question. Do you think the Tories have a chance? And if so, who would be the person to lead the party?
I think it's a very interesting query, somehow. I think you mentioned earlier Tom Tugendhat. He seems to me to be a A1 sort of person, quite frankly. But one doesn't know. These are sort of... It's so unpredictable, isn't it, really?
It is.
I can't see Labour sort of tinkering on for 10 years. I mean, that's probably unlikely, but and we might be going back to the ding-dong thing of the 60s and 70s, Labour and then Tories and so forth, Alec Douglas-Home and Harold Wilson and so thing, that it was a very ding-dong.
It was
shorter reigns, in fact.
It was shorter reigns,
years.
Absolutely. It was 6 years of Labour after 1964, 3.5 years of the Tories, and then 5 years of Labour from 1974 under Harold Wilson and then Jim Callaghan. It was much more of a ding-dong. That might well be the case, Anthony. I think we're agreeing not just on names, but also on the outcome, that it's unpredictable, that we don't know, and much will depend on how Keir Starmer does. He has to do better at finding growth, not just saying that we want to have growth, like an England football coach, manager saying we've got to win. That's easy to state the objective. He's got to actually deliver on it. And if he does get growth going and gets the NHS working and the country working better again, then I think it will be tough. Not impossible, but tough for the Tories to win.
Anthony, thanks very much indeed for the call. Much, as you have said, Sir Anthony, does indeed depend on Keir Starmer. But much also depends on the ability of the Conservative Party to remain united and see off the threat from Reform UK, doesn't it?
Well, of course it does. And at times of economic downturn throughout history, democratic parties are at risk from populist challenges from both the left and the right. And that's what happens. It's happened in British history. It happens across the world with democratic countries. It's hard when conditions are tough for democratic parties to get the trust back of people, when they're parties that are populist out on the left and the right, promising everything. They've never been in power. They've got no record to defend. They can promise the world and they don't have to deliver because they're unlikely to ever get power. So, I mean, of course it depends. But but Keir Starmer, if he is to see off the challenge from Reform, has to deliver, has to regain the trust and respect, as does whoever wins the Conservative Party leadership. And my goodness, this country needs to have a strong Conservative Party to challenge Labour. I mean, every Labour voter should want that, because they should favour democracy and favour a proper system of opposition.
Michael has texted in with another question relating to the leadership campaign. Do you think, asks Michael, that Conservative members are ready for a black woman leader? And is Kemi Badenoch putting up a fiercely right-wing persona just to give herself a chance, even though she may not totally believe in all of those policies?
Yes, Michael. The two questions there. Yes, I do think the Conservative Party is ready. I mean, it is, I said I'm not a Conservative, so I'm not buttering up the Conservative Party when I say that it has done much better than Labour with gender. There have been 3 Conservative leaders who've been women, and it's done far better in its diversity of top office holders, including Chancellors of the Exchequer. So, and the party in the country, the MPs voted for Rishi Sunak when Liz Truss one became Prime Minister, and then they voted for Rishi Sunak in the country. So I think, yes, in answer to that first question, yes, it is ready for Kemi Badenoch. And your second question is, why is she going so far out to the right? I don't know. And I don't think that's it's maybe what Conservative members want, but it's not what I think the country wants.
But I mean, she's doing it presumably because she thinks that's the way you win the campaign.
Look, Simon, anybody who does things just to curry favour and win short-term elections will never succeed in the long term.
We will have more of your questions for Sir Anthony Seldon. His new book is called Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister, and he's with us until the top of the hour. The time on LBC, 8:45.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
The Grenfell inquiry, a 1 million word report, amounts to zero action. No charges expected until 2026. This is wholly unacceptable. John's in Romford.
This is the most shameful days this country has ever seen. Our politicians are the people who are responsible for what happened in Grenfell Tower.
Naomi Norpington.
They've taken years over it. They've done nothing about it. It's now time for the government to force them to stop building work until they remedy the faulty cladding, which is putting people's lives at risk.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC. This is LBC with Simon Marks. Call 0345 6060 973. Text 84850. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
And Tom is on the line from Chelmsford in Essex with a question for Sir Anthony Seldon. Tom, over to you.
Oh, hiya. Yeah, hello, Anthony. Hello, Simon. Hello, everyone. I was interested. I'm going a little bit before I can my recollection. But in history, there was something called Black Wednesday.
Yes,
which I think your producers corrected me on. And so what are the comparisons between that event and the Liz Truss event? And also, apparently, there was some sort of Greek American billionaire, George Soros, who came forward and said back in the 1992, said he broke the Bank of England. So who broke the Bank of England Did anyone bank? And so, I mean, what's going on there?
Is it your suggestion, Tom, that earlier crises were politically survivable in a way that Liz Truss's crisis was not?
That would be an auxiliary.
Okay.
Super question, Tom. And so look. It's obviously a really fascinating question. So I can just give you one or two perspectives on it. It was similar in that they were massive financial crises, along with 1967 devaluation, 1976 the IMF crisis or the global financial crisis. 2007-09, as mentioned. I mean, they're up there. So it's similar in that, but it's different in that Liz Truss directly engineered it against advice, whereas John Major, then the Prime Minister, didn't make a series of mistakes that led to it in the same way. It's similar in that it spelt the end of Liz Truss, obviously lost the confidence of her colleagues in her, but it didn't spell the end of John Major. He carried on for another 5 years, but he was politically really damaged, and it gave a green light to people in his party to come out against him. He had a much more difficult last 5 years. Now, look, historians now think that John Major was, in fact, a pretty good Prime Minister. It would be a consensus view about Conservatives about him. I don't think they'll reach that same judgment, however, about Liz Truss. So just some insights.
Tom, thanks for the question. So, Anthony, talk a little bit about the denouement. I mean, the collapse of the economy, the collapse in sterling, it was all taking place while Kwasi Kwarteng was in Washington, D.C. Were there circumstances in which Liz Truss could have survived, or was it absolutely inevitable that a crisis of that magnitude would ultimately have resulted in her downfall?
In the book, I try and fill the book with conversations, much of it in dialogue, to try and capture the immediacy of what it was like. It was absolutely awful inside Downing Street. It was a total panic. No one had expected, particularly as the initial reception of the mini budget was in some quarters quite positive. And Liz Truss never in her dreams expected it to explode as badly as it did. And then it was panic. It was panic all the way. No one quite understood what was happening with the so-called LDIs and why sterling was having such a torrid time. You need to be able to keep the confidence of the financial sector. It's a core thing that a chancellor needs to do. And if you lose that confidence, then you're dead in the water. So it was an economic crisis, a financial crisis, a political crisis, Simon, all interweaved within each other, and finally a personal crisis for her. And an agony, an excruciating agony, whereby everything in her life, bit by bit, fell apart. Everything that she'd fought for and believed in, she had to sacrifice and lose. And people around her who she thought she had could always trust, she found that she couldn't. It was, as I talk about in the book, it is on a human level, it's a tragedy for her. But I think it's also a tragedy for the country and for Conservatives, for the Conservative Party. Had she listened, it did not have to go wrong. Look, when you become Prime Minister, there are so many forces locking you into place, keeping you in Downing Street, locking you into that, pinning you down to the Prime Minister's chair in the cabinet room. It was a phenomenal, unprecedented feat in history to blow it all up as quickly. And that's what the book's about. And never again, Simon, never again can we have a Prime Minister. The country can't stand it. And for her to take over from Boris Johnson, who there'll be lots of listeners who think he was the best thing since sliced toast and beyond. But the reality was he didn't cut it as Prime Minister.
We have a question that's been texted in from Sam. He says, I don't understand why, when the UK can hold a transformative general election in give or take a month, the Conservative leadership election will be taking almost half a year.
Century.
Why is the Conservative Party taking so long for their leadership election, which will decide on whether they move a couple of inches to the right or a couple of inches to the centre?
Sam, you need to be here in the studio taking over from me and Simon. We couldn't put it that well. It is flabbergasting. Half a year, half a century. Pretty much we've pretty much known who is always going to come out at top, and that will be the person who has won. I think it's a shame, really, that it is that long. There's a wish to try and be fair to all parties, so everyone has the chance to have their say. Look, if you look at American politics, the American presidential election takes the best part of a year or even longer. So, that's felt to be part of the democratic process.
I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't.
No, quite. But this is Britain. Frankly, I think I'd be surprised if most listeners didn't think it was too long.
OK, we've got a related question from John in Fulham. Good evening, John. What's your question for Sir Anthony?
Good evening, guys. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, doesn't it just show, Sir Anthony, the folly, the Liz Truss episode showed the folly of allowing grassroots party members far too much influence in electing the leader of a party in Parliament? Of course, this all goes back to Tony Benn in the 80s in the Labour Party, doesn't it? But grassroots party members are not accountable to anybody, and they often make decisions like Liz Truss.
I mean, John, I'm going to be coming back to football, both the ladies' game or the men's game. If you let the spectators pick the team and pick the captain, you're not going to get, they don't have the inside knowledge. You need to have the people with the inside knowledge picking the team and picking the captain, the party leader. And I think it's been a mistake, particularly because the party membership is so unrepresentative of Conservative Party voters.
Lynn has texted in. Thank you very much, John, for that question. Lynn has texted in to say the Tories need someone new for leader, untainted by previous dismal administrations, not the current shower. She argues that Tugendhat is no good, cares more for Europe than us. What's your view on that with regard to Tom Tugendhat, who the other day argued that the country was no longer taking the Conservative Party seriously as a political movement?
Well, Lynn, I wish you were on, so I'd love to hear who you thought should be the leader. I think it could be somebody who's experienced. It could be somebody who's a fresh face. The difficulty with a fresh face is you don't know quite how they'd perform. They haven't been challenged and tested in the heat of the exposure of ministerial office. But whoever it is, it has to be somebody who strikes not just Conservative voters, but the country at large as fundamentally decent, honourable, whether male or female, whatever their background, somebody who is able to tell a story about why they want the job, tell a story about where they're going to take the Conservative Party. Because the best leaders, the best Labour, the best Liberal, the best Conservative leaders always are storytellers. And they take people with them. It's something authentic and convincing about them. Now, which of the 5 left in the ring do you think's the most convincing?
Alex in Hebden Bridge asks, do you think that Liz Truss really believes in Donald Trump, or is she just jumping on the bandwagon in a bid to stay relevant and in the conversation?
Well, Alex,
yes,
from Hebden Bridge, where Margaret Thatcher's great press secretary, Bernard Ingham, came from, unless I've got that wrong. Alex, I don't know. I have no idea what Liz Truss really thinks. I knew what she used to think when she was Prime Minister, and I think she had the right thoughts, but the wrong way of implementing them. I don't know. I kind of think she does believe in Donald Trump, because in some ways Donald Trump is articulating what she now believes in. But whether she believes, like Donald Trump, that you can't trust the electorate and the electorate and voting is a big lie, well, I don't know. That's another matter.
I did think, seeing her at the Republican convention in Milwaukee, that she was certainly someone who was trying to work out what her personal future looks like. And that's a very, very difficult question to answer.
And we can all wonder what the Trump people were saying about, did they want to have a picture of Donald with Liz Truss?
Sir Anthony Seldon, it is a fascinating read. It's called Truss at 10, How Not to Be Prime Minister. It is published by Atlantic Books. I'm enormously grateful to you for coming in and taking my questions and the questions from all of our listeners this evening. Thanks so much to Sir Anthony Seldon.
Really nice to be on.
Into our final hour together tonight, and we're going to talk about a tough issue. On the day the Crown Prosecution Service dropped indecent assault charges against jailed, disgraced Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein, what kind of impact is that decision having on women and others who want to bring abuse claims to the watchful attention of the British authorities? The CPS decided there is no prospect now of securing a conviction in the Harvey Weinstein matter. It related to offences allegedly committed in 1996. If you or one of your loved ones has endured assault at the hands of a predator, how does that decision impact your efforts to seek justice in Britain? Can victims of alleged abuse truly get a fair hearing?
On your radio, on Global Player, and